A respected Houston detective's perfect marriage shatters in one horrifying moment, when she discovers her husband in bed with their 18-year-old daughter. But what happens next reveals a web of manipulation so twisted that it would challenge everything she believed about protecting the innocent, and force her to use every skill she had learned hunting predators to save the person she loved most. Detective Patricia Rodriguez had spent 15 years walking into other people's nightmares. She had seen the worst of humanity during her time with the Houston Police Department, specializing in cases that most officers preferred to avoid. Domestic violence calls, child abuse investigations, sexual assault cases. The kind of work that left scars on your soul and made you question whether there was any good left in the world. But Patricia had always found solace in one unshakable truth. No matter how dark her days became, no matter how many broken families she encountered, she could always come home to her own sanctuary. Her husband, Marcus Thompson, and their daughter, Isabella, represented everything pure and untainted in her life. They were her reminder that love still existed, that families could be whole, that not every home harbored secrets. Marcus worked as a construction foreman, a man who built things with his hands, while Patricia spent her days tearing apart lies and deception. They had met 20 years ago at a community barbecue, and Patricia still remembered the way he had made her laugh after one of the worst weeks of her career. He was steady, reliable, the kind of man who remembered anniversaries and never forgot to kiss her goodbye before leaving for work. Isabella had just turned 18 3 months earlier and was in her first semester at the University of Houston. She was studying psychology, inspired by her mother's work in law enforcement. Patricia often joked that Isabella wanted to fix people's minds while she fixed their circumstances. The girl had inherited Patricia's sharp intellect and Marcus's gentle nature, creating a combination that made everyone who met her predict great things for her future. Their home in the Heights neighborhood reflected the stability they had built together. A modest 2-story house with a front porch where Marcus had hung a swing, and a backyard where they had hosted countless family gatherings. The mortgage was nearly paid off, Isabella's college fund was fully funded, and their retirement plans were on track. By every measure that mattered, the Thompson-Rodriguez family was living the American dream. Patricia had always prided herself on her ability to read people. It was what made her such an effective detective. She could spot a lie from across a room, sense when someone was hiding something, recognize the subtle signs that indicated when a situation was about to turn dangerous. This skill had kept her alive during countless domestic calls, and had helped her solve cases that had stumped other investigators. So how had she missed what was happening in her own home? The question would haunt her later, but on that Tuesday evening in October, Patricia was focused on wrapping up what had been a particularly difficult case. A woman named Carmen Delgado had finally found the courage to press charges against her abusive husband after he had put her in the hospital for the 3rd time. Patricia had spent months building trust with Carmen, slowly convincing her that she deserved better, that her children deserved to grow up in a home without violence. The paperwork was extensive, but Patricia wanted everything perfect. Carmen's husband had connections in the city, and Patricia knew they would get only one chance to make the charges stick. She was reviewing witness statements when her partner, Detective Luis Moreno, knocked on her cubicle wall. "Rodriguez, you have been here for 12 hours straight. Go home to that beautiful family of yours." Patricia looked up from her computer screen, realizing for the first time how late it had gotten. The bullpen was nearly empty, and the cleaning crew was already making their rounds. She glanced at her watch and saw it was nearly 11:30 at night. "Marcus is going to kill me," she muttered, saving her work and shutting down her computer. "I promised Isabella we would look at her midterm grades together tonight." "They will understand," Luis said, gathering his own things. "They always do. That is why you have the best family on the force." Patricia smiled at the compliment, but she felt a familiar pang of guilt. How many dinners had she missed because of work? How many school events had Marcus attended alone? How many times had Isabella fallen asleep waiting for her mother to come home and help with homework? She made a mental promise as she drove through the quiet streets of Houston. Things were going to change. Isabella was only going to be 18 once, and Patricia did not want to miss any more of these precious moments. Marcus had been carrying more than his share of the parenting load, and it was time for Patricia to step up. The house was dark when she pulled into the driveway. which was not unusual for a weeknight. Marcus was typically in bed by 10:30, and Isabella had been keeping later hours since starting college, but she usually turned in by midnight. Patricia used her key to let herself in quietly, not wanting to wake anyone. She set her gun and badge on the kitchen counter, kicked off her shoes, and headed upstairs to check on her family, before getting ready for bed. It was a routine she had followed for years, a way of reassuring herself that everyone was safe and sound. Marcus and Isabella's rooms were at opposite ends of the upstairs hallway, with the master bedroom in between. Patricia always checked on Isabella first, a habit left over from when the girl was small and prone to nightmares. She tiptoed down the hall and gently pushed open Isabella's door. The bed was empty. Patricia felt a moment of confusion rather than concern. Isabella had been staying up later since starting college, often studying in the living room or video chatting with new friends. It was not uncommon for her to fall asleep on the couch while working on assignments. Patricia smiled to herself, remembering her own college days when she would crash anywhere that was convenient. She was about to head back downstairs to cover Isabella with a blanket when she noticed that the girl's backpack was not in its usual spot by her desk. Her laptop was missing too, along with the textbooks that were normally scattered across her study area. This was more unusual. Isabella was meticulous about her living space, a trait she had inherited from her mother. Patricia's detective instincts began to whisper, but she pushed them aside. This was her home, her family. Not every unusual detail was a clue to some greater mystery. Isabella was probably at a study group that had run late. Or maybe she had decided to spend the night at her roommate's dorm. College students did impulsive things all the time. Still, Patricia made a mental note to talk to Isabella about communication. A simple text message would have prevented this moment of uncertainty. As a police officer's daughter, Isabella understood better than most how quickly situations could change, how important it was to let people know where you were. Patricia turned toward the master bedroom, looking forward to sliding into bed next to Marcus. He would probably stir just enough to ask about her day, and she would whisper a summary of the Carmen Delgado case while he wrapped his arms around her. It was one of their small rituals, these late-night debriefs, that helped Patricia decompress from the darkness of her job. She pushed open the bedroom door, expecting to see Marcus's familiar silhouette under the covers. Instead, she found herself looking at a scene that would be burned into her memory forever. Marcus was not alone in their bed. Isabella was there with him. The two people Patricia loved most in the world were tangled together in a way that made her stomach drop and her knees go weak. For a moment, her mind simply refused to process what she was seeing. This could not be real. This could not be happening. Not in her home, not with her family, not with the people who were supposed to be her safe harbor from the world's cruelty. But 15 years as a detective had trained Patricia's eyes to see truth, even when her heart wanted to deny it. The scene before her was not ambiguous or innocent. This was not a misunderstanding that could be explained away with reasonable words and logical thinking. Her husband was having sexual relations with their 18-year-old daughter. The sound that escaped Patricia's throat was somewhere between a gasp and a scream. It was loud enough to wake both Marcus and Isabella, who separated quickly and looked toward the doorway with expressions of shock and horror that might have been comical under different circumstances. "Patricia," Marcus said, his voice hoarse with sleep and panic. "This is not what it looks like." But Patricia was no longer hearing words. The sound of her own heartbeat filled her ears like thunder, and her vision began to narrow to a tunnel. Her hand instinctively moved toward her hip, where her service weapon would normally be holstered, but she had left it downstairs in the kitchen. The realization that she had just reached for her gun while looking at her own family sent another shockwave through her system. Isabella was crying now, pulling the sheets up to cover herself, while trying to speak through her sobs. "Mum, please, you do not understand. It is not. I did not want," he said. "Get out," Patricia heard herself saying, though her voice sounded like it was coming from someone else. "Both of you, get out of my house, now." Marcus was scrambling for his clothes, his hands shaking as he tried to pull on his pants. "Patricia, we need to talk about this. You need to let me explain." "Explain?" The word came out as a roar. "Explain how I find my husband in bed with my daughter." Explain how the two people I trust most in the world have been. She could not finish the sentence. The words were too horrible to speak out loud. Isabella was trying to approach her, still wrapped in the sheet, her face streaked with tears. Mom, please listen to me. You have to understand what really happened here. But Patricia could not listen. Not yet. Her mind was reeling between her roles as a mother, a wife, and a police officer. Part of her wanted to comfort Isabella, to wrap her arms around her child and promise that everything would be okay. Another part wanted to arrest Marcus immediately, to read him his rights and drag him downtown for booking. And underneath it all was a growing rage that threatened to consume her entirely. I said, "Get out," Patricia screamed, her voice echoing through the house. "Both of you, out of my sight before I do something we will all regret." Marcus finished dressing and moved toward the door, but he stopped when he reached Patricia. For a moment she thought he was going to try to touch her, to offer some gesture of comfort or explanation. Instead, he looked her directly in the eyes and said something that would replay in her mind for weeks to come. "You were never here anyway, Patricia. You chose your job over your family a long time ago. Maybe if you had been around more, none of this would have happened." The accusation hit Patricia like a physical blow. She had spent years juggling her career and family responsibilities, always feeling like she was failing at both. The guilt she carried about missed dinners and late nights at the office was a constant weight on her shoulders. But to have Marcus weaponize that guilt, to use it as justification for what she had just witnessed, was beyond cruel. Before she could respond, Marcus was gone, his footsteps heavy on the stairs as he headed for the front door. Isabella lingered for a moment longer, her eyes pleading with Patricia to listen, to understand, to somehow make sense of the senseless. "Mom," Isabella whispered, "it is not what you think. Please give me a chance to tell you what really happened." But Patricia was not ready to hear explanations. Her mind was too fractured, her emotions too raw. She needed time to process what she had seen, to figure out how her perfect family had shattered so completely in the span of 30 seconds. "Not tonight," Patricia managed to say. We cannot, just go. Please just go." Isabella nodded through her tears and gathered her clothes, dressing quickly before following her father downstairs. Patricia heard the front door open and close twice, and then the house fell into a silence that felt heavier than any she had ever experienced. She was alone in the bedroom that had been her sanctuary for 20 years, surrounded by the wreckage of her life. The bed where she had slept next to Marcus for 2 decades was now contaminated with images she could not unsee. The room where she had nursed Isabella through countless childhood illnesses was now the scene of something unthinkable. Patricia sank to the floor and finally allowed herself to break down completely. The next 3 days passed in a haze of confusion and numbness. Patricia took emergency leave from work, telling Luis only that she was dealing with a family crisis. She could not bring herself to speak the truth out loud, not yet. Saying the words would make them real in a way that her mind was not ready to accept. Marcus had not tried to contact her, which she found both relieving and infuriating. Part of her had expected him to call with apologies and explanations, to beg for forgiveness or at least attempt to justify his actions. His silence felt like another betrayal, as if 20 years of marriage could be discarded without even a conversation. Isabella, however, had been calling and texting constantly. Her messages were desperate and pleading, begging Patricia to listen to her side of what had happened. Patricia had not been able to bring herself to read most of them, but the few she had glimpsed mentioned words like coercion and manipulation and "not my choice." On Thursday afternoon, Patricia finally decided to listen to one of Isabella's voicemails. Her daughter's voice was shaky and exhausted, but there was something in her tone that cut through Patricia's emotional fog. "Mum, I know you do not want to talk to me right now, and I understand why. What you saw looked horrible, and it was horrible, but not in the way you think. I need you to know that I have been trying to find a way to tell you what has been happening for months, but I was scared and confused, and I did not know how to make you believe me. Please, Mum, I am begging you to let me explain. I am your daughter, and I need your help." The word "help" pierced through Patricia's anger and confusion like a blade. She had been so focused on her own sense of betrayal that she had not fully considered what Isabella might be experiencing. As a detective who specialized in sexual assault cases, Patricia knew that victims often appeared complicit when they were actually being coerced or manipulated. She had seen cases where family members had been groomed for months or years before any physical contact occurred. Could she have been looking at this situation through the wrong lens? Patricia made herself listen to another voicemail. This one from Tuesday morning. Mom, I know what you saw looked like. I was a willing participant, but I need you to understand that I have been trapped in this situation for almost 6 months. It started with small things that seemed innocent, and by the time I realized what was happening, I was too scared and ashamed to tell anyone. I thought if I could just make it until I graduated and moved out permanently, maybe it would stop, but it has only gotten worse. I never wanted any of this to happen. Patricia felt her detective instincts finally overriding her personal emotions. She had been reacting as a betrayed wife and shocked mother, but she had not been thinking like the trained investigator she was. If Isabella was telling the truth, then Patricia had just blamed a victim for her own victimization. She forced herself to listen to one more message. This one from Wednesday night. Mom, I understand if you never want to see me again, but I need you to know that everything Marcus told you about you not being around enough is part of how he made this happen. He spent months telling me that you did not really care about our family, that you loved your job more than us, that I was the only one who really mattered to him. When I tried to pull away, he would threaten to tell you that it was all my idea, that I had seduced him. He said you would believe him over me, because I was just a kid who could not be trusted. I was terrified that I would lose you forever. The pieces began clicking together in Patricia's mind with sickening clarity. She recognized the pattern now, the classic signs of grooming and manipulation that she had seen in dozens of cases. The isolation, the blame shifting, the creation of shame and secrecy that prevented victims from seeking help. How had she missed this happening in her own home? Patricia grabbed her keys and drove to Isabella's dorm, her mind racing with questions and possibilities. She needed to hear the full account from her daughter, needed to understand exactly what had been happening and for how long. More importantly, she needed Isabella to know that she was not alone, that her mother was ready to fight for her. The University of Houston campus was bustling with students, heading to afternoon classes, their faces bright with the kind of optimism that Patricia remembered from her own college years. It seemed impossible that such darkness could exist alongside so much hope and possibility. Isabella's dorm room was on the 3rd floor of a modern building that smelled like pizza and laundry detergent. Patricia knocked softly, and the door opened almost immediately, as if Isabella had been waiting by the entrance. Her daughter looked terrible. Her usually bright eyes were swollen from crying. Her skin was pale and drawn, and she had lost weight that she could not afford to lose from her already slender frame. But what struck Patricia most was the way Isabella flinched when the door opened, as if she was expecting to be hit or yelled at. "Mum," Isabella whispered, and her voice broke on the single word. Patricia opened her arms, and Isabella collapsed into them, sobbing with a desperation that seemed to come from her very soul. They stood in the doorway holding each other while other students walked past, probably assuming they were witnessing a normal family reunion, rather than the beginning of what Patricia hoped would be healing. "I am so sorry," Isabella cried into Patricia's shoulder. "I am so sorry you had to see that. I am sorry I did not tell you sooner. I am sorry I let it happen." "Stop," Patricia said firmly, pulling back to look at her daughter's face. "You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing that happened was your fault. Do you understand me? None of this was your fault." Isabella's expression crumbled with relief, as if she had been holding her breath for days, waiting to hear those words. Patricia guided her daughter into the small dorm room and closed the door, creating a safe space where they could finally have the conversation that should have happened months ago. "Tell me everything," Patricia said, settling onto Isabella's bed and taking her daughter's hands. "Start from the beginning, and do not leave anything out. I need to understand exactly what Marcus did to you." Isabella took a shaky breath and began to speak, her voice growing stronger as she realized that her mother was truly listening, truly believing her. The account that emerged over the next 2 hours was a textbook case of predatory grooming, so clear and systematic that Patricia wondered how she could have been blind to it. It had started the previous spring, just after Isabella's high school graduation. Patricia had been working on a particularly demanding case involving a child trafficking ring, often staying at the office until midnight or later. Marcus had stepped up to fill the gap, spending more one-on-one time with Isabella than ever before. At first, His attention had seemed loving and appropriate. He had helped Isabella shop for college supplies, taken her to campus orientation events, and spent hours talking with her about her hopes and fears for the future. Isabella had been grateful for the support, especially since Patricia was so busy with work. But gradually, Marcus's behavior had begun to change. He started making comments about how mature Isabella was, how proud he was that she was becoming a woman, how lucky any man would be to have her attention. He began to criticize Patricia more frequently in front of Isabella, suggesting that her mother was too focused on work to really care about family. The physical boundaries had eroded slowly. Marcus had started giving Isabella longer hugs, commenting on her appearance, and finding excuses to be in her room or the bathroom when she was changing. When Isabella had expressed discomfort, he had dismissed her concerns as childish and reminded her that he was her father figure, that there was nothing inappropriate about their relationship. By the time Marcus had begun making more overt sexual advances, Isabella had been isolated and confused enough to believe that she was somehow responsible for his behavior. He had convinced her that she had been sending mixed signals, that she had encouraged his attention, that Patricia would be devastated if she learned that her daughter had seduced her husband. The actual sexual contact had begun in August, just before Isabella left for college. Marcus had escalated his behavior during what he claimed were goodbye conversations, convincing Isabella that this was how families showed love, that this was their special secret that would bond them forever. "I kept trying to avoid being alone with him," Isabella explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "But he would wait until you were at work, or he would come to my dorm room when he knew my roommate was in class. Every time I tried to say no, he would remind me that you would never believe me over him, that I would destroy our family if I said anything." Patricia felt rage building in her chest as she listened to her daughter describe months of calculated abuse. This was not a moment of weakness or a mistake in judgment. This was systematic predation, carried out by someone who had used his position of trust and authority to victimize the most vulnerable person in their family. "Why did he bring you to our house that night?" Patricia asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Isabella's face flushed with shame. "He said he missed sleeping in his own bed. He said that since you were working late again, it would be the perfect opportunity for us to spend quality time together. I tried to tell him no, but he got angry and started yelling about how ungrateful I was, how I was just like you, always putting other things before family." Patricia understood now why Isabella had been in their bed. It had not been a romantic rendezvous or a moment of mutual desire. It had been another instance of coercion and manipulation, orchestrated by someone who had spent months breaking down a young woman's ability to resist. "Isabella," Patricia said, taking her daughter's face in her hands, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. What Marcus did to you is called sexual abuse. It is a crime, and it is not your fault. You were manipulated by someone who should have protected you, someone who used his position in our family to hurt you. You are not responsible for any of this." Isabella nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know that now, but at the time, I felt so confused and guilty. He made me feel like I was the one who had done something wrong." "That is exactly what predators do," Patricia explained. "They make their victims feel responsible so that they will not report the abuse. Marcus knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew that it was wrong. That is why he worked so hard to keep it secret." Over the next several days, Patricia found herself applying her professional investigative skills to her own family's tragedy in ways she had never imagined. She interviewed Isabella multiple times, documenting dates, locations, and specific details of each incident of abuse. She reviewed phone records, text messages, and credit card statements, looking for patterns that would support Isabella's account. What she discovered was even more disturbing than she had initially realized. Marcus had been planning his abuse of Isabella for much longer than either of them had understood. His increased attention to Isabella during her senior year had not been spontaneous fatherly affection. It had been calculated grooming, designed to break down her boundaries and prepare her for sexual abuse. Patricia found evidence that Marcus had been researching grooming techniques online, visiting websites that provided advice for manipulating young women. He had purchased gifts for Isabella that were inappropriate for a stepfather to give, including lingerie that he had convinced her to accept by claiming it was from Patricia. Most horrifyingly, Patricia discovered that Marcus had been taking photographs of Isabella without her knowledge or consent. Hidden cameras in her bedroom and bathroom had captured intimate moments that were never meant to be seen by anyone else. When confronted with this evidence, Isabella broke down completely, realizing for the first time the full extent of Marcus's violations. "I never knew about the cameras," Isabella sobbed. "I never consented to being photographed. How long has he been watching me?" Patricia's investigation revealed that the surveillance had been going on for over a year, beginning long before any physical contact had occurred. Marcus had been planning and fantasizing about abusing Isabella, while still maintaining the facade of a loving husband and stepfather. The discovery of the photographs changed everything for Patricia. This was not a crime of passion or a moment of poor judgment. This was premeditated sexual abuse, carefully planned and systematically executed by someone who had spent months preparing to victimize an 18-year-old girl. Patricia knew she had to involve law enforcement, but she also knew that cases involving family members were complex and emotionally challenging for everyone involved. She made the difficult decision to contact a detective from a different precinct, someone who could investigate the case without the personal connections that might compromise the process. Detective Amanda Foster from the Harris County Sheriff's Office had worked sex crimes for over a decade and had a reputation for being both thorough and compassionate. When Patricia explained the situation, Amanda immediately understood the delicate nature of the case and agreed to handle it personally. "I know this is incredibly difficult for you," Amanda told Patricia during their first meeting. "Investigating a family member goes against every instinct we have as both cops and parents. But Isabella needs justice, and Marcus needs to be held accountable for what he has done." The investigation that followed was meticulous and comprehensive. Amanda interviewed Isabella multiple times, using specialized techniques designed to help victims of sexual abuse feel safe and supported while providing their testimony. She collected physical evidence from both Patricia's house and Isabella's dorm room, including the hidden cameras and photographs that Marcus had taken without consent. Perhaps most importantly, Amanda helped Isabella understand that she was not alone in her experience. She connected Isabella with other survivors of family sexual abuse, providing her with resources and support that would be crucial for her long-term healing. The case against Marcus was solid from both a legal and evidentiary standpoint. He had violated multiple laws, including sexual abuse of a family member, invasion of privacy, and possession of non-consensual intimate images. When confronted with the evidence, his attorney advised him that fighting the charges would be futile and would only subject Isabella to additional trauma during a public trial. Marcus ultimately agreed to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a sentence of 12 years in prison, followed by lifetime registration as a sex offender. He would also be required to pay for Isabella's therapy and counseling, and he would be prohibited from having any contact with her for the rest of his life. The day Marcus was sentenced, Patricia sat in the courtroom holding Isabella's hand, watching as the man who had been her husband for 20 years was led away in shackles. She felt no satisfaction in his punishment, only a deep sadness for the family that had been destroyed by his choices. But she also felt something else, pride in her daughter's courage and hope for their future together. The months following Marcus's sentencing were challenging for both Patricia and Isabella, but they were also marked by healing and growth that neither of them had thought possible during the darkest days of their crisis. Isabella threw herself into therapy with a determination that impressed everyone who worked with her. She attended individual counseling sessions twice a week, participated in a support group for survivors of family sexual abuse, and even began volunteering with organizations that helped other young women who had experienced similar trauma. "I do not want what happened to me to be meaningless," Isabella told her mother one evening as they shared dinner in Patricia's kitchen. "If I can help even one person recognize the warning signs or find the courage to speak up, then maybe some good can come from all of this." Patricia was amazed by her daughter's resilience and wisdom. Isabella had taken the worst experience of her life and was transforming it into a source of strength and purpose. She had changed her major from psychology to social work, with a focus on family trauma and abuse prevention. "You are stronger than I ever imagined," Patricia told her daughter. "I am so proud of the woman you are becoming." For Patricia, The healing process involved confronting some uncomfortable truths about her own role in the family dynamic that had allowed Marcus's abuse to occur. While she was not responsible for his criminal behavior, she had to acknowledge that her heavy focus on work had created opportunities for him to isolate and manipulate. Isabella, I spent so many years thinking that providing financial security and solving other people's problems was how I showed love. Patricia reflected during one of her own therapy sessions. I never realized that my physical and emotional absence was creating vulnerabilities in my own home. This realization led Patricia to make significant changes in her approach to both work and family. She requested a transfer to a day shift position that would allow her to be home more consistently in the evenings. She also began setting firmer boundaries around overtime and weekend work, recognizing that her family needed her presence as much as her paycheck. The experience also transformed Patricia's effectiveness as a detective. Her personal understanding of how family abuse operated gave her new insights into the cases she investigated. She became known throughout the department as someone who could connect with victims in ways that other officers could not, and her case clearance rate improved dramatically. Having lived through this experience has made me a better advocate for victims, Patricia explained to her supervisor. I understand now how easy it is to miss the signs, how complicated family dynamics can be, and how much courage it takes for someone to come forward with allegations against a family member. Patricia began conducting training sessions for other officers, teaching them how to recognize grooming behaviors and how to interview family abuse victims with sensitivity and skill. She also worked with local schools and community organizations, educating parents and teenagers about the warning signs of predatory behavior. The mother-daughter relationship between Patricia and Isabella grew stronger than it had ever been. They had been forced to confront the deepest, darkest secrets and fears, and they had emerged with a bond built on honesty, trust, and mutual respect. I used to be afraid to tell you things because I thought you would judge me or be disappointed, Isabella admitted during one of their regular evening conversations. Now I know that you will always listen, always believe me, and always fight for me when I need protection. Patricia had learned that being a good mother was not about being perfect or having all the answers. It was about being present, being willing to listen, and being brave enough to face difficult truths when they emerged. I thought I was protecting you by working so hard to make our life secure, Patricia told Isabella. I did not realize that what you needed most was simply for me to be there, to pay attention, to notice when things were wrong. The two women developed new traditions and rituals that helped them build positive memories together. They took weekend trips to places they had never visited, attended cooking classes together, and started a small garden in Patricia's backyard. These activities were simple, but they represented the kind of quality time that had been missing from their relationship for years. Isabella's healing journey was not without setbacks and challenges. She experienced periods of depression and anxiety, had nightmares about her abuse, and struggled with feelings of shame and self-doubt, but she also demonstrated remarkable resilience and growth, developing coping strategies and support systems that would serve her well throughout her life. Some days are harder than others, Isabella acknowledged, but I have learned that healing is not about forgetting what happened or pretending it did not affect me. It is about taking back control of my life and my future. One of the most significant developments in Isabella's recovery was her decision to speak publicly about her experience. She began sharing her account with high school students, college groups, and community organizations, helping others understand how grooming and family abuse actually occur. People think that family abuse is always obvious, that victims should just speak up or walk away, Isabella explained during one of her presentations. But the reality is much more complicated. Predators are skilled at making their victims feel responsible, at isolating them from support systems, and at convincing them that no one will believe them if they report the abuse. Isabella's public speaking had a profound impact on audiences throughout the Houston area. Several young women came forward after hearing her presentations, reporting their own experiences of family abuse and seeking help for situations they have been too frightened or ashamed to address. Your daughter is saving lives, Amanda Foster told Patricia after one of Isabella's presentations. The courage she is showing by speaking publicly about what happened is giving other victims permission to seek help. For Patricia, watching Isabella transform her trauma into a source of strength and advocacy was both heartbreaking and inspiring. She was proud of her daughter's courage, But she also felt deep sadness that Isabella had been forced to develop such wisdom and resilience at such a young age. No child should have to become an expert on abuse and trauma, Patricia reflected. But since Isabella has been forced to walk this path, I am grateful that she is using her experience to help others. The case had also had broader implications for law enforcement practices in Harris County. Patricia's insights about family abuse dynamics had led to changes in how officers were trained to handle domestic violence calls involving family members. The department had implemented new protocols for investigating cases where children or young adults might be victims of abuse by parental figures. We realized that we had been treating family abuse cases as fundamentally different from stranger abuse cases, Patricia explained to a group of training officers. But the psychological dynamics are often very similar. Victims need the same kind of support and advocacy, regardless of their relationship to the perpetrator. 2 years after that horrific night when Patricia discovered Marcus abusing Isabella, both women had built new lives that were stronger and more authentic than what they had before. The trauma they had experienced together had taught them valuable lessons about trust, communication, and the importance of paying attention to warning signs that might indicate someone is in danger. Patricia had been promoted to sergeant and was now supervising a team of detectives who specialized in family violence cases. Her personal experience had given her credibility with both victims and other officers that could not have been gained through training alone. She was frequently invited to speak at law enforcement conferences about recognizing and investigating family abuse. The most important thing I learned from this experience is that predators are skilled at hiding in plain sight, Patricia told audiences. They often appear to be model family members, community leaders, or trusted authority figures. We cannot rely on our assumptions about who looks like an abuser, because abuse crosses all demographic and social boundaries. Isabella had graduated with honors from the University of Houston and had been accepted into a master's degree program in social work. She planned to specialize in trauma therapy, with a particular focus on helping young adults who had experienced family abuse. Her personal experience had given her insights and empathy that would make her an exceptionally effective therapist. I want to help other survivors understand that what happened to them was not their fault and that healing is possible, Isabella explained. I also want to help families recognize warning signs before abuse occurs, so that fewer people have to experience what I went through. The mother-daughter relationship between Patricia and Isabella had become a source of strength for both women. They had learned to communicate openly about difficult topics, to support each other through challenges, and to celebrate their individual growth and achievements. Going through this experience together has taught us that love is not just about the good times, Patricia reflected. Real love is about being willing to face the hardest truths, to support each other through the darkest moments, and to keep fighting for each other, even when everything seems hopeless. The case had also had lasting impacts on the broader community. Marcus's arrest and conviction had sent a clear message that family abuse would not be tolerated, regardless of the perpetrator's social status or community connections. Several other victims had come forward to report their own experiences of abuse, leading to additional arrests and convictions. One of the most important things we learned is that speaking up about abuse creates permission for other victims to come forward, Amanda Foster noted. Isabella's courage in testifying against Marcus and then sharing her account publicly has probably prevented other children from being victimized. For viewers who might be watching this account and wondering whether they or someone they know might be experiencing similar abuse, Patricia and Isabella want to share some important information. Family abuse often begins with subtle boundary violations, but gradually escalate over time. Predators typically target individuals who are isolated, vulnerable, or dependent on them for support. Warning signs of family grooming and abuse can include excessive interest in a young person's physical development or romantic relationships, attempts to isolate the victim from friends or other family members, gift-giving that seems inappropriate or excessive, violations of privacy such as entering bedrooms or bathrooms without permission, and attempts to create secrets or special relationships that exclude other family members. If something feels wrong, trust your instincts, Isabella advises. Do not let anyone convince you that inappropriate behavior is normal or that you are responsible for someone else's actions. You deserve to feel safe in your own home and family. Patricia emphasizes the importance of creating open communication within families, where children and young adults feel safe reporting concerns without fear of judgment or retaliation. We need to make sure that young people know they can come to us with anything, no matter how uncomfortable or confusing it might be, she says. If you or someone you know is experiencing family abuse, please know that help is available. The National Sexual Assault Hotline can be reached 24 hours a day at 1-800-656-4673. Local law enforcement agencies also have specialized units trained to handle family violence cases with sensitivity and professionalism. The most important thing to remember is that you are not alone, Patricia emphasizes. There are people who will believe you, who will support you, and who will fight to protect you. You just have to find the courage to reach out and ask for help. The account of Patricia and Isabella's experience is ultimately one of survival, healing, and hope. While they would never choose to relive the trauma they experienced, both women acknowledge that it has made them stronger, wiser, and more committed to protecting others from similar harm. We cannot change what happened to us, Isabella reflects, but we can control how we respond to it. We can choose to let it make us bitter and afraid, or we can choose to let it make us more compassionate and determined to help others. For Patricia, the experience reinforced her commitment to law enforcement as a tool for justice and protection. This job is not just about solving cases or making arrests, she says. It is about standing up for people who cannot protect themselves and making sure that predators face consequences for their actions. If this account has resonated with you, or if you know someone who might benefit from hearing Isabella's message of hope and healing, please consider sharing it with others. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply let people know that they are not alone in their struggles. Remember that healing is possible, that justice can be achieved, and that even the darkest experiences can be transformed into sources of strength and purpose. Patricia and Isabella's journey proves that families can survive even the most devastating betrayals, and that love and trust can be rebuilt stronger than ever before. Thank you for taking the time to hear their account. If you found value in this experience, please consider subscribing to True Crime Village for more stories of survival, justice, and hope. Together, we can create a community where difficult truths are faced with courage, where victims are believed and supported, and where predators are held accountable for their actions. Your engagement with these accounts helps ensure that important messages about safety, healing, and justice reach the people who need to hear them most. Please share, comment, and continue the conversation about how we can better protect the vulnerable members of our communities.